Hey y'all, Teanna Branae here, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be making some food. We're going to make some meatballs and gravy with mashed potatoes. To start off, I'm just boiling some water, so that's just going to be water and salt. And this is going to be for my mashed potatoes. So it's literally just tap water, a little bit of table salt, let it boil on the stove. I put it on like medium, maybe on the stove. I have 3 red potatoes that I have washed. You can use whatever kind of potatoes you want to use. I like red potatoes, so that's what I'm using. And I'm going to cut the potatoes in half and then cut them in half again. So I'm cutting the potatoes in fourths. I'm not taking the skin off. I like my potatoes with the skin in them. If you don't like the skin, you could take that off, or if you want to only use half of the skin, just cut the skin off of some potatoes and not others, but I just leave the skin on all of my potatoes. And these are going to go into that water once we've brought it to a boil. Next, I'm going to cut up a whole onion. This is just a yellow onion, I believe. So I'm going to cut some of it in half, and then some of it I'm going to cut into squares. And then we're going to take a cast iron. You can use whatever kind of pan you want to use. I'm using a cast iron. I put a little bit of vegetable oil in it, but not much, because the ground beef is going to make its own oil. And now we're going to season the ground beef with some black pepper. I don't measure, I eyeball everything. So if you want measurements, this is not the place for you. We're also going to put some seasoned salt. If you want, you can use regular salt, but I'm using seasoned salt. We're going to put a little bit of crushed red pepper, not too much. I don't want it to be spicy, so just a little bit of crushed red pepper. And then the onions that we cut into squares, we're also going to pop those into the mix as well. And those are going to be inside of our meatballs when we shape them. But remember, we still have some onions sitting to the side as well that we have not used yet. And then we're going to put some garlic as well. I put garlic in pretty much everything. The garlic I like to use comes in the glass jar. But if you want to use fresh garlic or just the garlic powder or whatever, you can use that as well. You probably can use garlic paste. Whatever kind of garlic you want to use it. This is just the one that I prefer. And then we're going to add some Worcestershire sauce. I only use Worcestershire sauce when I don't have balsamic vinaigrette. That's my favorite thing to add to my meats, but I don't have any, so we're using Worcestershire. It's going to give it the same flavor for the most part, though. And we're going to mix that in. And then we're going to add some breadcrumbs, and we're going to add an egg as well, just to kind of bind the meat together to make our meatballs. Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't always put the breadcrumbs and the egg in my ground beef when I make meatballs. I'm doing it today just because I do it sometimes, but it's not something I do every single day. So if you don't have eggs and you don't have the breadcrumbs, you can still form your meatballs without it. The adding those does kind of change the consistency a little bit, but it doesn't mean that you can't do the meal without it. And then we're just gonna mix all that in. You want to keep mixing until you don't see the egg separate from the meat, pretty much. So until you don't see like any slimy egg whites or egg yolks just sitting on the surface of the meat, that's how much you want to mix. And I'm just adding a little bit of thyme there. I'm just mixing that all in. All right, now we are going to form our meatballs. Our pan is hot now. We did preheat that once we put the oil in, so it's nice and hot. I'm just forming them with my hands one at a time. You can form these all at once before you put them on the pan. I just do it one at a time by habit. But you can just pre-make them and pop them in that way. But this is just how I like to do it. I don't measure the meat. I just eyeball it like I eyeball all my seasonings. So I couldn't really tell you guys how much meat I'm using, but maybe about a little bit more than, I don't know, maybe a quarter size around. I don't know. And what we're going to do is we're going to brown them on both sides. So once they're brown on the bottom, I'm going to flip them over. I'm not trying to cook them all the way through. I'm just trying to make sure they're brown on the top and the bottom. And at this time, I'm also going to preheat my oven to 350 degrees while these cook on the other side. All right, once they're brown on both sides to my liking, I'm going to take them out and set them to the side. Make sure you put them in a clean bowl. Don't put them in a dirty bowl. Make sure you wash that bowl out if you reuse that same bowl. And now with the drippings that are in the pan, I'm going to add, I want to say maybe I added about a half of a cup of flour to the oil in the pan. And I'm just going to stir that in until it gets like a nice, thick, frothy, brown consistency, if that makes sense. I'm going to add some more garlic. I put garlic on about everything. And then we're going to mix that in. And I'm adding a full cup of water. And for my water to make my gravy, I just eyeball it. So if I feel like it's too thick, I add more water. If I feel like it's too thin, I add more flour. And I just play with it back and forth. In this video, you guys are going to see me add water a couple of times because I just wanted to get the consistency just right. And now we're adding some onions. Those are the onions that we had cut in half. So now we're adding those. And I'm just separating them so they don't, they're not stuck together when I put them in the skillet. And I prefer for my gravy to be just a little bit watery when it's like this, because once I put it in the oven, it's going to thicken up anyways. So you want to start it off looser so it can firm up a little bit more in the oven. You don't want to dry it out. So we're just adding more Worcestershire sauce. Once again, if I had balsamic, I would put that, but I don't, so I'm using Worcestershire. It's the same effect. And then we're going to add crushed red pepper. Once again, not too much. We're adding some Lowry seasoned salt. And then that's more thyme. I'm just going to mix all of that in. And you want it to have a nice brown color. Rule of thumb, if it still looks too white, that means you haven't put enough seasoning in it. And then we're just adding some Tony's Creole seasoning. I put Creole seasoning pretty much in my gravy anytime I make gravy. I just like the taste it gives it. And I'm adding another cup of water because once again, it was a little too thick for it to go in the oven that way. Because I've made it so much, I know when I take it out, I'm not gonna like the consistency of it. So I want it a little bit more runny. And now we're gonna add those meatballs back in. So now we have double onions, as you can see. We have onions in the meatballs, and then we have onions in the gravy, but they're both cut different ways. They both serve a different purpose, and they both are gonna make everything taste even better. So I'm adding all those back in. I'm going to put the lid on my cast iron and put those in the oven for about 30 to 40 minutes, I believe is how long I left them in there. And you guys will see what they look like when they come out at the end of the video. But they were so good. The food was so good. I'm just checking my mashed potatoes now. They aren't quite soft enough yet for me to pull them out. They're getting there, but not quite. For my vegetable, I just did some broccoli cuts, nothing special, with butter, seasoned salt, and pepper, and I just boiled that on the stove, nothing fancy. And now we're gonna make the seasoning mix for our mashed potatoes. So I like to melt my butter because I keep my butter in the refrigerator. If it's room temperature, just pop it on the table, but I put mine in the fridge, so I melt it. And we're just adding pepper, salt, and parsley. And then once again, you guessed it, I am going to add garlic. And I just let that sit kind of while I wait for my potatoes to be done. And then once they're done, I pop the potatoes in that mix right on top of it. I find that melting my butter just makes me be able to mix the potatoes more than if it was just a hard stick of butter. Because once again, I don't have room temperature butter in our place. My butter's always in the fridge. If your butter's room temperature, you may not have to melt it. But because mine is always so cold, I melt it. So once I put the potatoes in the bowl, I just get my masher and I go to mashing the potatoes. And like I said, I leave that skin on. I like the rougher taste of the potatoes. And I'm just adding a little bit of milk, not too much. I don't want them to be runny necessarily, like instant mashed potato runny. I want them to have a nice, thick, rich flavor to them. If you have sour cream, you can also add that, by the way. And voila, or the voila. Whichever one it is, that's what I mean. And then this is just how the broccoli came out after I boiled them on the stove. Really quick, simple, easy, and full of flavor. And I just like to put all of my food into storage containers as I'm cooking. That way I don't have to worry about it when it's time for me to clean up, and I can just keep cleaning up as I cook. But you can leave it in the pot if you want. All right, let's make some lemonade. I'm using a glass pitcher just because I like the glass pitcher, not for any specific reason. I'm taking one whole lemon and I'm going to slice it, and then I'm going to remove the seeds from the lemon. I'm only removing the seeds because the pitcher I use does not have a strainer, and my son is only 2 years old and he's also going to drink this, and I don't want him to swallow a seed or choke on a seed or anything. You don't have to remove the seeds. If it was just myself and my husband drinking this, I would not. But because my son will be, I'm taking the seeds out of each slice. But I like to squeeze the slice over the pitcher and then drop the slice in the pitcher just to kind of release the juice a little bit. And we're going to do that for each slice. Make sure your hands are clean if you're removing, well, make sure your hands are clean if you're cooking in general, I should say. All right, then we're going to add 2 strawberries. You don't have to add the strawberries. We like to. It's not a requirement at all. 2 strawberries. Each of them is going to be cut into fourths. And then I just pop them into the mix. And then we're going to add some honey. I don't measure it. Maybe about a half of a tablespoon of honey. Maybe that's how much I add. If I had to estimate, or guesstimate I should say, it's probably a half of a tablespoon. Then we're just going to add a little bit of lemon juice. You don't have to put the lemon juice. You can always just add a second regular lemon if you want. I just like to put a little bit of lemon juice. And we're going to put some sugar. Sorry, my arm covered the frame. I don't measure the sugar. I wing it. I've made this enough that I can eyeball the sugar. And we're just adding some regular water to it. Use whatever kind of water you want. And we're going to stir that up, but you won't see me do that. I did that off camera, and I'll show you the finished product at the end. And once we pull the meatballs out, this is how they look. And it looks so good, and it tasted so good. You can see the gravy thickened a lot. And that's that lemonade, and that's that plate at the end. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys later.